We went from 40,000 telehealth consultations a year to 40 million in 10 days. It wasn't perfect when it started, so we iterated. We had telehealth 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We were always iterating.
Often they're making these decisions without having all the information, all the right time or technical background. There's been a lot of talk this year on tariffs, supply chain disruptions, the ongoing conflict.
But there will always be events. If your model is that your business will only work in a best case scenario, then it's almost certainly broken. Being in touch with your customers, your clients, and what they actually need is now indispensable.
Welcome to the Connected Workplaces podcast. I'm Emma Bedford, and this is a series for leaders who are responsible and involved in making big decisions in their capital works projects for their organisation. And often they're making these decisions without having all the information, all the right time or technical background to feel completely comfortable in doing so. So each episode of this podcast series, we're going to unpack what's really happening out there right now across Australia's health, life sciences, advanced manufacturing, food and beverage sectors, and the real pressures that exist in making decisions and shaping projects from procurement, cost, risk, regulation, delivery. The intent is that this isn't about textbook answers or theory. It's about practical insights with tangible, real experience and some honest conversations. So welcome, Greg. I'm very pleased to introduce you today. We know, Greg, you've served as Australia's Federal Health Minister during one of the most challenging periods in recent history and had a front row seat of how government, industry and infrastructure all intersect, particularly when the stakes are high and decisions need to be made quickly. So, Greg, thank you for joining me, and hopefully we can make today a little less stressful than the last few years in your previous role have been. And in fact, I was talking to my mum just yesterday and she was saying it feels like we've gone full circle. We've gone from talking about coronavirus and now we're talking about car owner virus with the cost of
yes.
with the cost of petrol at the moment. And I guess that's a hint of what we're going to touch on today, of what are the key things that are happening around Australia and around the globe that are impacting and those macro elements that are having trickle-down effects on large infrastructure projects in those sectors that we talked about.
So it's a pleasure to join you. It is actually 6 years to the day since we were in the absolute furnace of COVID. And there was uncertainty at a global, national and business level. And right now, obviously, with the Iran conflict, the impact on the Straits of Hormuz, the impact on the supply of oil and all of the related products, and therefore the economic effects, business leaders are facing the same decisions and same challenges. And in essence, what this is always about is there's a plan, but then how do we manage in a crisis? And the management in a crisis comes down, I think, always to forming a team, having, if you have not already got it, an emergency plan, and then communicating. Those three things, I think, are staples. That's what we endeavoured to do. We had the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and we formed the National Cabinet with all of the states, territories and the Commonwealth. We had the COVID management plan, which we adapted. You know, we were creating telehealth at exactly this time 6 years ago. And then we were communicating every day so as people understood what we knew, honestly what we did not know because it was an evolving situation and nobody knows when the Iran conflict will end and how it will end, and then what we would be doing about it. And those things, I think, are abiding lessons in conflict management.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on quite a few of the biggest elements that are impacting Australia right now. You know, we've got things like Olympics. You mentioned the Iran conflict. We've got labour shortages. We're still in a post-COVID Australian sovereignty piece as well. So what are you seeing as the biggest forces that are shaping how major infrastructure projects and capital works projects are delivered?
Firstly, there is a macro trend towards onshoring of supply chain management and sensitive processes. So by that I mean there is a desire to be doing more clinical trials in Australia, a desire to be doing more laboratory testing in Australia. That's for reasons of quality and integrity, reasons for data security, and also for reasons of sovereign capability in times of conflict or supply chain uncertainty or breach. Another example of which we are living through at the moment, but this will not be the last. It is imaginable that there could be a conflict over Taiwan. It is imaginable that there could be a conflict in the South China Sea. It is foreseeable that there could be other diseases or a financial crisis affecting one of our major trading partners. So all of these are not just foreseeable, but some of them at some stage may occur. And certainly the Straits of Hormuz was always foreseeable. So what does that mean? It means that businesses are looking to do more work in Australia. I know, for example, that Chinese pharmaceutical manufacturers want to be doing sovereign manufacturing in Australia and clinical trials for the reason that there are geopolitical tensions with the United States. There has been a debate around some of the data quality in some of the cases. Therefore, Australia is a safe haven, high quality. So for manufacturers, for laboratory owners, for people who are involved in testing, there is more of a demand for Australia in these uncertain times for our own reasons, but also for international reasons. So Australia is, you would say, with a tailwind behind it in a world of headwinds.
And how is this drive for national sovereignty and onshoring of a number of these different elements, how is this changing the way that projects are being prioritised and funded?
I think there are a couple of things here. The first is overseas investors and processors are looking to Australia. Now, we're not disconnected from the global supply chain, and the idea that we would suddenly put up the shutters is, in my view, completely wrong in terms of that which is actually to come and that which should come. So we're not disconnecting, but we become, because of our safety and security and our trusted position, more of a destination for international trials and international capital. Secondly, internally, there is that sovereign security, not of displacing international supply chains, but of ensuring that we have core products. As an example, the role of Moderna in Australia, very large-scale project. CSL has built both the blood fractionation processes at Broadmeadows and the vaccine manufacturing at Tullamarine. You have BVAQ, which has been doing its work in Western Melbourne, the laboratory work of ALS and others. All of these are occurring within Australia and many others. And both Australia and, to be fair, New Zealand are seen as attractive destinations because of the political stability, the physical safety, and then the quality and integrity of the systems, and therefore the international transferability. In Australia, though, you have the National Reconstruction Fund, you have the Medical Research Future Fund, the R&D tax concession. These are all government policies and initiatives which are supporting domestic manufacturing and helping to facilitate those international tailwinds that come towards Australia in a world where people are concerned about other jurisdictions.
We know that there are labour shortages that are potentially also making some of the challenges of onshoring some of these elements more challenging, and attraction retention in both the health, life sciences, and also in the construction sector as well is something of key importance for people. But how do you see technology, particularly AI and automation, supporting this and changing the way that projects are planned and delivered over the next 5 to 10 years?
So, look, I'm a dad of a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old. AI in social media, I think, is an unmitigated disaster. AI in project planning, in discovery, in health, in life sciences, in construction is an overwhelming positive good and a source of productivity. What does it mean in practice? It means that the design process can be done much more rapidly. It means that the construction process should be able to be done much more rapidly. And here's the distinction that, not all apples are equal. I say that in the sense that some, and obviously I've had a lot to do with yourself and Connected and New Zealand cousins such as Expedite, where minimal disruption is a design, delivery and construction philosophy. On the other hand, I've watched the Mornington Peninsula Freeway, which has, as locals would say, witches' hats out in areas that are not being worked upon for most days of the last 6 months. And so that was a maximal disruption project. So the whole philosophy of delivering around existing sites whilst causing minimal disruption to the public, to the operators, or in the case of like an aged care facility, residents, that is going to be a defining characteristic. Minimal disruption versus indifference. And that goes to cost, that goes to efficiency, that goes to the capacity to carry on the day-to-day operations of an ongoing provider.
We're getting lots of questions from our clients around how they future-proof their projects with the rapid changing of technology and AI being integrated into their processes and testing procedures and life sciences and the equipment that's available. Just last week, I had a conversation with someone around new technology in the cell therapy space that's going to, massively shift the way that the amount of batches that are done and the amount of labour that are required. And so it's a challenging time for clients to understand how do they plan for their project and how do they keep adaptability in their project, because some of these facilities are high capital expenditure. So how do you get it right the first time, which is something that we're seeing. Any comments on
Yeah,
on
so
that? Yeah.
I think in all of the last century, this decade is the one which will see the most singular quantum leap in productivity and capacity. What AI is doing is it's already half a decade ahead of where we thought it would be 2 years ago. The sheer learning capacity of the systems is building in enormous productivity. So what does that mean for somebody making decisions? They have to make decisions and recognize that the perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good. And I think that's a really important message. Don't be stuck in the past. You have to step forward. Now, wherever possible, you keep your optionality involved. But around design, building what I would call modular design in a minimal disruption way. Modular design means that you are building in the equivalent of the extra lane on the freeway for the traffic which is likely to come. Now, you don't know what the particular form of the car will be which will travel along that, but you do know that extra bandwidth, that extra laneway is going to be required in all likelihood. And if you have not prepared for that, then the costs of adapting in a subsequent build are deadweight costs and likely to be at a significantly higher price than now.
I can tell that the freeway has had quite an impact on you.
Oh no, this is the biggest talking point on the Mornington Peninsula, other than the price of petrol, which really is affecting families, is the waste of time from a completely sort of thoughtless design and delivery project. So sorry for whoever was doing it, but it's a great example of how not to do something.
Yeah.
Because lane after lane was blocked when nobody was working on it. Whereas, I've seen the sort of obsessive focus on minimal disruption and that concept and design philosophy coupled with the iterative work with clients and some of the projects that I've been privileged to sort of have an insight into, whether it's, laboratories for Forex beer. I mean, these are quite exciting to see things done well and quickly. And from the response of the operators that they're happy that, the worst fears of being disrupted haven't materialised, and the best hopes of what has been created have been achieved. That's a really, exciting thing to witness.
Mm. You sort of preempted one of my next questions about decision making. You obviously had to make fast decisions with moving information or an evolving situation. How do you think leaders should think about decision making in this current environment?
So frameworks, and that framework is what do we want to achieve and what do we want to avoid, and then we use the planning team. And so having a really clear project lead on your side. And yes, final decision might come to the CEO or the board, but having the project lead and a team around her or him. Then the second thing is having an absolutely crystal clear set of objectives and actually being able to define them with what is the capability of the facility, the design, the build, and the price and the time frame. Those three sort of core metrics. Others might be relevant to a project. And then every day we would have in COVID, we would meet from 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. with the department, deal with the emerging issues. We would identify anything which required decision, and later in the day we would have decision time. And where it was had to be referred from me to Cabinet or the Prime Minister, or from the Prime Minister to the National Cabinet, then we would have a clear escalation process to do that. But what we didn't do was sit on everything. At this exact time 6 years ago, I had to make the call on telehealth and moving from a static Medicare system of 40,000 telehealth consultations a year to what evolved in 10 days into 40 million consultations a year and became a permanent part of the system. And in the end, we made the decision. And then it wasn't perfect when it started, so we iterated. We had telehealth 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We were at 6 versions within some months, but we were always iterating. As an example, there was some debate for clinical reasons. Would you need to have face-to-face, so a person would need to use the equivalent of FaceTime or Teams or Zoom, when most people didn't quite know, particularly elderly or those who were a bit more infirm. And so we went with the clinical or the medical advice, but very quickly, within the first 48 hours, we realised that was locking out those who just didn't have the capability to use what's now normal, Teams, Zoom, Google, or FaceTime. And so we had ordinary telephone, and that was the first iteration. And so we made those iterations quickly and made those adaptations quickly, but always working within the goal, is it safe, but is it accessible? And why did we do that? To separate infected patients who were not at imminent risk from medical staff, so we didn't have the tragedies that we were seeing in Milan or Madrid, where they were losing their workforce, as workers, but most importantly, many of them were perishing. And we avoided that in Australia by making a headline decision quickly and then iterating and iterating.
So clear structure of what the objectives are, good governance and structure of communications and decision making, and being open to evolution, of constant evolution and iteration, and not being afraid of that.
Yeah, team, plan, process, And the process was we had the daily. This is when you're in a project or a situation which requires it, and then the communication. In some cases, it will be to the public. In others, it's not, of public interest, merit, need, but to the team. So as people are aware of decisions travelling or where a decision is pending, sometimes I would say, we will consider that and we will come back to you within 30 days with a draft plan.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how that relates to some of the early meetings that we have with clients looking to undertake a project. And some of the key questions we ask was, what does good look like? What's the number one thing that we have to get right in this project? So we sort of have a host of key questions that I'd encourage every leader that is looking to undertake a capital works project to ask. What's the cost of delay? I think that's a really important one. We want to be in by this date is generally the answer that we get, but what's the cost of not being in by that date? And also understanding the return on investment. That's always a key one. And I think sharing that broadly rather than keeping it to a business case or keeping it to, some of the key players or the facilities lead or the lab manager or whoever might be involved in the project, but sharing more broadly as appropriate with the requirements, but return on investment and sharing that with the project team enables a project team to bring value and not just manage costs.
So can I turn the tables a tiny bit here and ask you a question?
Sure.
Is there a particular example, whether it's in health, whether it's in animal sciences, whether perhaps in food and beverage or in environmental science that sticks out in your experience?
Yeah, there's a TIC project that we did recently, Testing, Inspection, Certification project. They were consolidating a number of leases into one facility, and consolidation is something that we hear of a lot at the moment. That's a big topic of conversation for capital works projects. And they had tests that were sort of travelling down the road or from one location to another. And so part of their return on investment was getting everybody into one site and reducing the travel distance for their tests. So understanding those travel distance concerns and throughput objectives and to really get into the nitty-gritty of what the organisation was trying to achieve was really critical, all while understanding the fact that we had 6 different locations with multiple cultures, multiple different types of personalities. Brilliant. So it's now a campus that's significantly reduced their OPEX by sort of over 5%. It's an iterative process and we'll continue testing that, but their OPEX has been an over 5% reduction from prior to their new site. So far, so good in terms of their attraction retention. Bringing everyone together has been a fantastic process and they've retained all of their top talent and attracted some new ones. And so far, it's a resounding success in terms of their throughput numbers. But I guess involving a project team in that process and not just saying we want X, Y, Z built, but understanding the why behind it and the strategy behind it, the return on investment and the business impacts, and us being able to bring value to that rather than just build it is key for us.
Back to you. You're in charge again.
Thank you. There's a growing focus on risk, and we've touched on that being some of the factors that are out there in the macro world. But we're also hearing things like clients trying to find properties and there being a shortage of greenfield properties. And so there's more brownfield and refurbishment elements happening, which is bringing around different constraints and risks into projects. So organisations, are they getting better at managing risk or are we just more aware of it, in your opinion?
Look, I think every CEO, board, project manager is aware of risk, and there are differing degrees of capabilities as to how well they manage it. But good in this space is very much about, on the one hand, identifying the risks, but on the other, not being frozen by them. So what does that mean? As I said at the outset, it's you have your designated project lead. I was the designated project lead for managing COVID for Australia. And I had my team around me, and I reported through the Prime Minister and the National Security Committee of Cabinet. And then you have the plan for COVID. I think most of us will remember flattening the curve. What did that actually mean? It meant reducing the spread whilst increasing the capability with one key metric that the Prime Minister set. He was looking at Milan, where doctors were having to make decisions as to who would get access to ventilation. And they were making life and death decisions. So it wasn't whether somebody was given a treatment and maybe survived and maybe didn't. They had to determine who actually got access to that treatment. And his metric was, we will never have to face that choice in Australia. Our job is to contain the spread whilst we build that capacity. And then for each of those, we had 4 pillars: borders, testing, tracing and distancing for containment, primary, aged care, hospitals and research for capacity. And so every day we would manage against that plan, and then we would communicate that plan to the public, what were the relevant elements. And again, pretty much for 2 years, somebody was standing up, most often me, but with, Brendan Murphy or Paul Kelly or the Chief Nursing Officer, Alison McMillan or others, to provide that. But there was always that process of actually managing against the plan. We would use it every day. It was boring in a way because it was so structured, but it was why at the end of the day, Australia came out of this in a world that had an average 1.6 years loss of life expectancy, according to the Global Burden of Disease study. From 2019 to the end of 2021, Australia was one of the very few to have an increase, and we actually increased life expectancy by 0.2 years. So that granular combination of responsibility and team, and then process, which was followed, and then rapid decision-making and iterative response with what you'd call, an attempt to ensure minimal disruption of getting on and doing things. And that's within the capability of each board and CEO to say, we can actually manage these things, but we've got to be very defined about what we're doing.
The definition of roles and accountability too, of how that's structured. I'm going to jump back to some of the global elements that we're seeing. So there's been a lot of talk this year on tariffs, supply chain disruptions, the ongoing conflict. How do you see these elements as impacting the delivery of capital works projects in Australia at the moment?
So I think people would be naturally hesitant. The international events, it may be tariffs, it may be supply chain, which is most obviously impacted by the conflict in Iran and then the Persian Gulf, but there will always be events, always. Therefore, you have to presume that there will be international events that will challenge. What does that mean for Australia? I think that means you have to be able to proceed on the basis of, let's assume a worst case, is my business survivable when the tide is out, to sort of paraphrase Warren Buffett. And that's the business question, and that's the plant question. If you are making your ROI dependent upon a best case scenario, then that's a risk which is very hard to mitigate because there are things which are beyond your control. So is the base case viable, sustainable, and therefore sufficient to proceed with the capital works? Upside is additional benefit to the business. No global disruption is additional benefit. So you have to presume that and then make the decision.
Yeah, business continuity is a huge topic of conversation for all of our clients, particularly, as I mentioned, we're having conversations with clients around consolidating their portfolio, the rise of the super lab rather than distributed lab elements.
Well, this is a global trend, and we are seeing sort of common working spaces, and that could be in terms of office services, media production, but in particular in laboratories. And you will often see an anchor tenant and then other laboratory users clustered around them. So the creation of live precincts, there's an economic benefit, but then there's an intellectual property benefit where, uh, the brilliant, young, emerging researchers or scientists who might be running a startup are engaging with, others who are more senior. I'll give you an example. In Melbourne, CSL, I think, has very cleverly built their new headquarters in Flemington Road in Parkville, and they have provisioned and made space for emerging companies and startups. And so it's created quite a vibrant activity. That, I think, is a really good case study and example, and others are doing it. And as you are planning your projects, you can do it as standalone. But if you can be incorporating the capacity for others to plug in, then that becomes a very attractive environment and a very creative environment.
Absolutely. And it's bringing about a big focus on attraction retention. As we touched on earlier, the labour shortages and the talent shortages in certain areas. I think we're seeing people come out of university having been exposed to some of these amazing campuses that we've got around Australia with fantastic facilities, and then they're entering a workforce that's got perhaps older facilities that are out in the middle of industrial estates and those sorts of things. And there's a bit of a shift. So there is a push and a drive for many organisations to have more of that attraction retention element, like these precincts that are closer into the city, etc. And it's sort of shifting Capital Works projects' objectives.
So what is AI doing here? I mean, I think you have three trends. One is the campus. Two is at the same time, obviously, the flexible work environment. And then the third is AI, where it's not just the capacity, but there is the rise of what you call the digital worker or the co-worker, human decision maker, but the co-worker is a reality. It's already a reality, and it's supplementing processes. As an example, in health, what I'm beginning to see is staffing and rostering and patient booking. So it might be that an endoscopy clinic has patients book in, lots of questions. Nothing is forgotten in the asking of questions of the digital receptionist, and it's being done at 11 at night or 6 in the morning. That is then scheduled into the theatre booking. The AI co-worker who's doing the theatre booking and rostering gets a call at 3 a.m. from a mum or a dad, who's a single parent. Their child is ill. They're not going to be able to make their 7 a.m. shift. If they don't make the shift, the list falls over, enormous cost. And so they automatically have a prioritisation of the 5 people who might be available on a Thursday morning and the 10 who aren't. And then at 6 a.m. they'll begin contacting them, as an agreed time in priority to find that person who can get there. And that is being effective. And the rise of those co-workers is helping with science and helping with design. It can be a little frightening, but it's inevitable and it's desirable, and you have to engage in that. I see companies such as Future Secure in Australia who are doing this. I see companies such as Harrison AI or Heidi. They're all involved. And then in your design process, this is something that you're doing and engaging in already, and that capability will grow.
So, Greg, one of the final questions that I have for you is, if you were advising a CEO today that was about to embark on a major Capital Works project, what would you tell them to focus on, and what would you tell them to be cautious of?
So the disaggregated model, I think, where you're trying to get a contractor and then multiple different subcontractors, as opposed to a single project manager who will consult, design and deliver early, work to a more fixed arrangement, which does give you the certainty, and in particular commit to minimal disruption. People who have that philosophy of minimal disruption, that I think is the key. I go back to where we started, and you're right. I have a sort of visceral trauma from the Mornington Peninsula Freeway? Is it somebody who'd leave the witches' hats out?
Mm.
Or is it somebody who's obsessed about keeping the traffic flowing, who sees it from the perspective of the user and not their own convenience? And that really is the mark of modern project management, that they are living inside the mind, the experience, the needs of the operator, the commissioning party, the people who are delivering the project, and constantly uh, in touch with their needs. So it's not just business IQ; it's in a sense emotional IQ, and are they connected? Is ultimately that concept.
I guess we'd just like to say thank you very much, Greg. I know we've covered a lot of topics today, but hopefully our whole objective with this podcast was to help people make more informed decisions, that we're embarking on this journey of capital works projects, and hopefully we've helped them make better decisions or going in feeling more informed.
I would say this, that in an uncertain world, and it's right to focus on the uncertainty and the external shocks, I nevertheless remain very optimistic about Australia and the Australian environment. That global uncertainty makes Australia more attractive. That global uncertainty also means that we have greater need for resilience and reliance, as we saw 6 years ago and as we are seeing anew again. And what that means is there should be more demand for domestic high-tech projects, and I believe there will be more need and more demand going forward.
Pressure makes diamonds,
Well, exactly.
and challenges prompts innovation.
Well, we are an innovative nation. There's no question. That's one of the things that people from overseas say to me all the time. They look at how we responded to COVID as a nation. No matter how challenging and painful it was for us, it was vastly more so for everyone else in the world. And if we can be number one in the world as a health system at the most difficult time, we can absolutely be at the forefront of the world going forwards on design, delivery, project management, and therefore continuing operations with minimal disruption and the maximum possible outcome.